Hi guys, my name is Barodante. Corel Painter 2022 came out, and Corel gave me a license so I would make a video and maybe use it from time to time, which is fine by me because I happen to like Painter quite a lot. So I want to go through a couple of the new features that they presented on the website, see how they do in real life, starting from here, right after a quick word from this channel sponsor Wingfox, and their exciting course called Exquisite Illustration Tutorial for Trading Card Game Design. I told you guys about this course before when it was in the fundraising stage, and now it's actually here, it's being released. We have quite a few episodes available already, and they're coming fast, well translated, so it's a great time to get the full access to the course now for $99 before all the episodes get released. The lecturer is the Chinese artist that goes by the name Nemo, and they are a very experienced artist that also took classes from Ruan Jia, my favorite digital artist. In the course, you go through the full process of creating a beautiful illustration for a trading card game design, which pretty much means a beautiful, impressive rendering of a fantasy warrior. So if any of you guys are interested, the affiliate link as well as the extra 15% discount code are in the video description. So let me launch Painter. This is actually the splash screen for it. So yeah, as I said, Corel gave me a license, but I wasn't paid to say anything, so that's how it is. So yeah, here I am. I'm going to be using a quick photo reference I found online, just as a base to have something to paint. And I'm gonna be using a special thick paint layer to be able to paint with the brushes that have this thick paint effect that are really cool. It looks kind of like this when you paint around with them. Like maybe this brush, maybe something else, but generally using this technology, I really like it. So generally the strategy I'm going for is painting like this for a while in one layer, getting all the colors around, you know, it's blending and everything. But after a while, it's losing this ability to show the dry, cool edge when there's no paint in the layer, and it's like painting with wet on dry. Everything becomes wet on wet when you cover the whole canvas with the colors. So after that, you just create a new layer, and automatically Painter is fixing and adding the actual new thick paint layer. And right now you can see I'm painting on top, so pretty much adding a new layer in this workflow is like letting all the paint on the canvas get dry and then painting with wet on dry. So that's really cool. I want to play around with that. Obviously, I'm not a traditional artist. I don't have like strategies or values in that regard of how things actually are supposed to look like. I just know the brush flow, like the brush work that I want to see and the kind of textures that I like seeing, you know? And I'm gonna be using this balance between wet on wet and wet on dry to get the results I want. One more thing, like there are several interesting features in here, but one of them was that they introduced a lot of new features of working with layers, and many of them include improvements in the way you just manipulate layers, how you can apply same effect to all the selected layers, like something about the masking. It's a lot closer to the way layers work in Photoshop, which is always welcome. And one more feature that they added that's Painter specific is that this special thick paint layer used to be just to work with thick paint brushes, and watercolor layers only to work with watercolor brushes. But now you can choose any other brush, like for instance this Oils Bravura brush, which is one of the new oil brushes. They're like simple, fast brushes that are aimed to create certain effects that look pretty cool, like for a good base. And you can see I'm painting that in the thick paint layer. So after that, when I'll switch back to the thick paint brush, I will be working from these colors. I'll be smearing them around and everything. It's really useful for the watercolor layer, because this way you can paint a base and it's actually considered like these pixels will be considered like the watercolor colors, like watercolor brushwork in there. And then when you actually use watercolor on top of it, it will be actually bleeding and blending around these colors as if it was the part of watercolor. So it's one detail and it's a part of the brushwork now. So that's a very useful feature they added. I think it's really cool that you can do that now. But that effect is like special because you get to let the paint bleed around with water, which is looking really cool. That's something you can only do if you get the colors inside of the watercolor layer. But in terms of thick paint layer, I think the strategy should be a bit different because you want to get those thick paint effects from whatever brush you're choosing. I think it will work much better. So I'll make some kind of brushwork like this. And by the way, in here, there's a new button. This is one of the features that was mentioned earlier. Yeah, by the way, brush selector panel, which is like, I never knew what it's for, but really, it's made for line art because you need to switch back to specific sizes all the time. I never knew why like Medibang or Clip Studio Paint have that. Now I know. Still don't need it, but good to know. Yeah, totally revamped brush selector things. In here, there's a lot of like filters. You see I'm using like my favorites to quickly find what I need. Everything's looking much cleaner. The names of the brushes are much cleaner and everything looking really cool. So that part is like totally revamped, much more pleasant to use. It opens up immediately. I remember there were issues with that kind of stuff before, not anymore. Yeah, really cool watercolors, like I specifically like these watercolor reel. I don't remember which one I found, it was just so cool. Just creating such a cool effect. I think it was the one that was like selected by default. It has like a pretty solid brush stroke at first. Whoa, this one is like doing it in real time at all. That's kind of cool. But yeah, these brushes are like special. They're new and they're actually the kind of watercolor effect that you probably haven't seen before. Yeah, I think this is the brush. Look at it. Like you've seen this kind of simulations before, but look at the result. It's so cool, like this texture. It's like a blend of like vector or pixel simulations, but also with photo textures. And this combination is just so cool and realistic. I really like it. Like, it's so awesome. It's looking amazing. So yeah, that's watercolor. And finally, this feature that was at the top, a new stamp type brush customization. So stamp type brushes are the Photoshop type brushes where you just have stamps that copy around. And in here, like these oils, Bravura, as they're called, this collection, this is exactly that kind of brushes because it's literally copying the same shape around. You see when I'm doing it slowly. So it's like you can make this type of brush in Photoshop. Not exactly, but maybe exactly actually. Maybe they're fully compatible with Photoshop or something. But the point is, there's this new button in here, and you can choose different types of stamps that you can choose with this brush because it's a stamp type brush. So yeah, now it's like looking completely different, and it's just a quick way to do that, change to some other shape while keeping all the settings intact. Something you can kind of do in Photoshop, but in here it's a bit more stable because you get the same spacing and everything else is the same. So you really can just quickly play around with what kind of shape you want. This is something I kind of miss in Photoshop sometimes because whenever you change the shape of the stamp, it's always a lot of work to then adapt it to a certain behavior, you know? So yeah, I'm gonna be using one of these shapes or whatever, this kind of brush that's really fast to work with on big scales to create this base. And it's really cool because all these thick paint brushes, they're like, they look cool on smaller size because they're made for creating final brushwork. As I think in real painting, in traditional painting, you don't use this kind of thick paint brush to cover the whole canvas, you know? You use some kind of different types of brushes for that. And you see, it doesn't even like work well on big scales because like they make sure that you don't even try. It's not the point. So then you need to create a base with something else. And in this case, I'm creating this base right now with this simpler Photoshop style brush. And then I found this feature, I don't know if it's new or was it in 2021, as I wasn't playing around too much with all these effects, but in here, lift canvas to thick paint layer or to watercolor layer. And thick paint, you press on that and you select like how much of the thickness you want to add to the thing. Image luminance, that's interesting. So it's gonna like fake it into adding some kind of variations of thickness. Ah, yeah, I'm seeing some thickness effect, okay. but it's pretty subtle actually. But yeah, from that, you get this quick base, and you have certain thickness, and on top of that, you start working with your actual thick paint brush. Obviously, I'm gonna choose something else, because this one is very, like, blurry kind of brush. I mean, it's blurry when it's wet on wet, but still. What about dry, this one? Yeah, something like this, maybe. It's looking quite fun. Maybe, again, for different situations, different stuff would work better. But yeah, that's my strategy. Right now, I'm gonna just start and add in some of the base with flat and quick brush. Oh yeah, and before I start, if you like the merch, the link is in the description. Wow, that is fast. Like, the size of this brush is insane. And it's blending too, like, that's really snappy. It was creating this brush size for a while though. When you're choosing a big brush, it's taking its time to load all the positions of it into RAM or something, I don't know, but after it's done, this is such a fast brush, holy crap. Whoa, that's actually pretty cool. So there are effects to apply to the, like, patterns, to the dabs. So initially this brush looks like this with this dab, but then you can apply like feather to it right away. This is something that I always wanted to have in Photoshop, like just quickly make your brush softer by just fading from the edges. And there you go. It just applies it up to like an insane, like super soft brush look. Awesome, this is so cool. But what else does it have? Threshold. Oh, this will probably make it very sharp, very harsh. So yeah, threshold is like, if we have it like at 75 or like at 70, it means if the transparency of the dab is lower than 70%, it's turning into 0% there. So it's like sinking away into transparency. So now it's like eaten away like this, instead of having all those semi-transparent parts on the edges. And at much stronger, like it even dissolve more. This is very useful actually for creating very texturized looks. So feather is to make things softer, and threshold is really to make things much more harsh. Yeah, this will make a lot of these textures way more usable when you want something texturized, you know, really harsh. Blur is literally just blurring all the details, right? That's so cool. Whoa. Okay, 25. Yeah, like literally blurred. So cool, like a quick little studio to just prepare the kind of alpha you want to use for your brush. Yeah, I need to find a quick way to rotate them though. Many of them are just rotated like this, is weird. Like I could use that quick setting in here, rotating and maybe something else like spacing maybe? Those two things would be very useful here because those two settings, like rotation of the dab and spacing, are really something that you have to change a lot when you change the dabs. Like if you really go wild with choosing all kinds of them like I do right now. I remember there were like quick settings. This is, yeah, like unified one cool window that they introduced, I think in the 2021 version, and it's cool that it has all the necessary things. It's like a special glowing window here, so spacing, well, spacing is fine, I guess, I don't know. Yeah, this one, this angle, 90 degrees. So it will be following the direction. All right, that's looking pretty cool. Okay, that's pretty cool. So they made selection tools pretty awesome in 2021, I think. And in here, I just noticed there's like a selection brush. So I went to lasso, started selecting, and I wanted to use, I was using like that select and adjust feature in Photoshop to have like the sharp lasso selection to actually change the shape with your brushwork. But obviously in here, there are no features like that. But what I noticed, there was brush selection or selection brush. Oh, this one. Yeah, that's the selection brush. And in here I can set up like the grain for it and its scale, so pretty much when I select with this right away. I mean, it's pretty cool. I would love to have like more specific, maybe like literally use the brush that I'm using right now, although I understand that with many different brushes in Painter, it's probably impossible. But like, you know, just select some kind of stamp brushes that would be more fitting, you know, because right now it's just this soft round brush. I can use grain on it, but it's still just that. Like, this is a separate panel. It has nothing to do with the selection brush. Anyway, I'm gonna just be happy with what I have here. I'm gonna increase the scale of this grain texture to the maximum, just so it would make some kind of a more complex edge of the selection. And boom, I'm just moving it around right away. Really nice when things work just like in Photoshop. Okay, I think it's time to switch to the thick paint brushes, although I had quite a lot of fun with this one already. Whoa, that's looking cool. Lift to thick paint. That is looking so cool. I could totally use the thick paint knives brushes in here. They're pretty fast and they're awesome for laying down shapes. I love flat brushes for defining like planes and basic shapes. This is really cool. This is something I've always like fancied the idea of, you know, finding the most insane brush, like very expressive and weird to control like this, and then just go ahead and try to make it actually, or like actually visualize something with it legit. Usually leads to like the most interesting paintings thanks to that. Like all these soft, like stamp-based brushes, they're all like productive and fast to work with, but this way is a pretty good way to achieving some interesting look. Okay, this is a new feeling. Like, again, I've seen this brush before and everything, like this heavy paint engine, but it really like, at a certain point I felt this, like I'm actually pushing the real paint around. It's so cool. You see, I'm creating these new layers. The actual layer I'm painting with, this is like, at the bottom there's just an older stage, almost without any thick paint. I should actually like convert it to default. And the main painting layer is actually in default as well, because I keep creating new layer, so I would be able to add these dry details on top. And then I merge it down, and it has to convert to like a default layer. It was asking me, and then I turned it by default. And then when I start adding new brushwork, it's creating a new thick layer, and this is pretty much the way I work. Like, it's not a problem to lose those details at the bottom. You don't really need them if you are not planning to like blend with them or something. Maybe if you work with like super thick layers of this thick mode of thick paint, like when you choose in the settings so they would be even thicker, then it would make more sense. But in here, I am totally fine with just layering on top without the consideration of the thickness at the bottom. And then if I want to like blend the colors around in the main layer, I'll just quickly convert it to thick paint. It seems like an extra hassle and you don't really know why you're doing it, but really the point is you're switching between wet paint or dry paint. That's the whole point. Like if you're in the thick paint layer, like, and it's the main artwork, you're blending the colors around like this. And if you're in a separate layer, it's a dry mode. That's pretty much all I'm doing here. I wonder if it can be turned into something else, like not necessarily changing the layers all the time, but like literally a switch in here, on wet or on dry. So will it be blending with everything in this layer or not? That would be cool, but if we don't have that, this trick with like switching between layers, I think it's pretty cool. It's working pretty well to me. And I'm just loving the way it acts, the way it looks. I'll try to make sure this painting at all makes any sense, because so far it looks ridiculous, especially in the eyes. Obviously I need to spend more time with the eyes. So let's see where it gets me. That is just nuts. So cool. Okay, I don't know how long I'm gonna just keep doing it, but this is so cool. Like legit, this whole effect and everything, it looks fun and interesting when you look at it at first, but when you just keep working with it for like an hour, this is something special. Like, I'm not a huge expert on how paint acts, but just like, not when you're trying to, you know, that something looks not exactly the way the paint works, but when you're actually just trying to work and trying to achieve certain details, certain things visualized on the canvas, it just feels like I'm actually putting on some kind of thick paint on the canvas, like it's legit. It feels very legit. And I mean, this resulting texture, like I'm zooming in a lot, this combination of like smearing and sharper like bits of paint, I love these like aisles of paint. This is literally the way it looks like when you add more paint on top of like dry bumps of earlier paint. You know, and when you zoom out just a little bit smaller than 100% scale, it just really looks so good. Like, yeah, when you zoom in completely, like to 100% or something, you see pixel precise details. They're kind of specific, although honestly, in many cases, they just look so cool anyway. This is really, really cool. Now, obviously, the audience for this is pretty narrow, like concept artists won't really use this or something, but if your goal is to like create paintings, romantic paintings, like actual paintings, which is rare these days, right? This is probably a way to go. And what's interesting, it wasn't here just a couple of years ago, like this thick paint engine. It's very different from Impasto that it used to have, like it was just pretty weird comparing to this. This is way more advanced. And yeah, the result is just so cool. Nothing like the reference. Like, the girl is actually Japanese, I think, in the reference. And I got, well, maybe an anime character a little bit, but not Japanese person. Well, yeah, I gotta say, like, I'm super impressed with this. This is just so cool. And generally the fact that the updates in the interface and in the way things work here and there, they really just don't stand in the way. Like, I still miss some of the features from Photoshop, like for instance, when I make a selection, I would like to use the content-aware thing, but that's like such a narrow thing. I think I'm like the only person that does that. But aside from that, like overall the workflow, the way the brushes work, even if you choose like a basic brush, you can choose the alphas and everything. Layers act very similarly. Interesting. I said this was fun to work with. Like, no. Comparing to what happened next, that wasn't fun. This is really cool. And I think like with practice, because I feel like in certain areas, I still would like benefit from merging all together, all of the details together and doing this. Like it's a bit slow when you want to merge everything together and then work with all of it being wet. So it would be really cool to do it, you know, a bit more naturally, because I'm obviously breaking the way the things are supposed to work, actually. I'm pretty sure if the developers are watching this right now, they're like, what are you doing? You can't just, you know, convert the thick paint all the time to the default layer. Because it's like, it turns all the shadows into actual colors, and now like I can pick up this black color of the shadow, which wasn't the point, of course. I wasn't painting black colors in there. That kind of stuff is what happens when you turn thick paint into just a basic layer. And even when I turn it back into thick paint, it's still gonna be baked in like that. But like, I tried to make it work without doing it. Like, this is the blending brush and everything, right? It's working like wet on wet. I tried to like remove the bleed, still doing that, then remove the wetness, and it's really close, but not really. Like, it's so not the way it acts when you're actually in a separate layer. It looks so cool. Like, comparing this to, I don't even know if it's, yeah, like super different, like the texture shows through and everything. So it would be cool, like specifically, so I wouldn't have to mess around with the settings of the brush, because I don't want to change it all the time, obviously. It would be cool. I think it's an important feature of any brush engine that simulates wet paint and like going for a realistic look. Switching back and forth between, okay, now everything's dry, I want to paint with, like, so it wouldn't blend into it, but I don't want to bake in all the shadows of everything, so without like doing these manipulations with the layers. It would be real cool. Maybe there is a way to do it, but I don't know of that way. Oh, actually, interesting. So I got this really strong texture. Was this involved in this? Like 400% scale. That's what I did before on a different brush, on an eraser, actually. So if I don't do it, it would look differently. It would look like smaller. That's why these bits, they're like so huge. But I mean, it kind of looks cool, again, as I said, like paint that sticks to bumps of the earlier paint. So it kind of looks cool, but I think it wasn't supposed to work like that, because I made the scale of the texture really big. Like, this feels a bit more like the way the textures would be set up usually, right? And this is like big chunks, chunks. These are small and nice, and these are like really big, crunchy granules. And this is the way I was painting all the time. But I mean, not exactly bad. What's interesting, it was like 400% texture, but it doesn't even show through as a low resolution texture, because these bits, they're so processed that they look like interesting chunks. It doesn't look low res at all. Well, yeah, that was really fun. Tell me guys what you think. Obviously, the good old problem remains. I wish Corel Painter would be a lot cheaper. It's like $400 or something. It would be nice to have this for cheaper, but on the other hand, I can see how maybe a lot of programming and, you know, making all of it work went into this and went into all other types of brush engines in here and everything. Like, I still think it could be cheaper, like, but it definitely has its value if you're actually using this kind of brushes and everything, and not just, you know, buy Corel Painter and then use just the brushes that you can get in Photoshop or in any other drawing app. You know, that wouldn't make sense. But if you're using this kind of brush engines, then yeah, that's something that you can only get here, and that's something that your clients can only get from you then, you know. It may be very much worth it in that regard. I just realized I forgot highlights on that eye at all. Looks kind of weird. Okay, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Man, it's just so satisfying, especially when you get to this dry layer and start adding like details to the silhouettes of like objects, like of this blouse or whatever she's wearing. So satisfying to have these natural, interesting, yet sharp brush details. Really cool. Very useful too, like I didn't have to touch it afterwards at all.